This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support.
Inspired by Alan's exploration of GH last episode, I thought I would bring a topic to the discussion table, something that I did a few years ago, and I've been meaning to share and sort of promote as an idea. And what I have done is I have made a dynamic GitHub profile page.
I'm so glad that you have done this, because every so often I look at your GitHub repo for whatever reason. I'm trying to find something you created, and I look in your Git and I get sidetracked by the shiny stuff on the homepage that you have on GitHub. And I think, oh, I really want that. And then I try and figure out how to do it. And I'm like, no, I can't be bothered. No. So thank you for writing this up and telling us how to do this. Off you go.
Okay. So in order to understand some of what I'm about to explain, it might be useful if you have a look at my GitHub profile page. I could say the words out loud, but it's in the show notes. That will be at linuxmatters.sh/61. There will be a link to my GitHub profile. Now, aside from a graphical banner that you'll be greeted with, there are other things that are happening on that page. And I'll just explain sort of why I did this initially. The first is it's a bit of flair and showmanship. Let's be absolutely honest. It's a little bit of, fun. It's also useful for discovery. So when you look at my page, I've got links to a number of the projects, and there's nothing clever about having links to the projects that you maintain, but it highlights some of the things that I work on, but also a nice, attractive way to put links to your social profiles. So I use shields.io to create a whole series of buttons to my online profiles. And in some cases, I have a small Discord community, and the link to the Discord community updates live with the number of people that are online in that Discord community at the time that you're looking at the page. So that's sort of the first little bit of sort of dynamic capability that exists within this. So it's good for discovery. And it's also good for learning. So if you haven't learned GitHub Actions and GitHub Workflows yet, or GitHub Pages, making one of these dynamic profiles is a nice gentle introduction to using all of those technologies and understanding how to glue them together.
So you've mentioned GitHub Actions there. Does that mean that every time someone logs into your Discord, it runs a GitHub action to update this markdown file so that the number's right?
Not quite, but we'll get to the automation that exists to make this magic happen in just a little bit.
It's magic now.
Yeah, magic. And the other reason I did this is that when you combine a interesting GitHub profile page with your LinkedIn profile page, you can actually get by without requiring a CV when you start applying for jobs, particularly in a software development role, because those two things together are kind of like the full expression of who you are and what you're interested in and what you can do. So there's another reason for getting involved. So how do you do this? The first thing you do is, if you've got your own username in GitHub, you can create a repository that is your username, and you can put a readme.md file in that repository, and that will get rendered as your landing page. But of course, a readme.md file is static. So this doesn't address the issue of having an interesting dynamic page. So at that point, we start to introduce a few other projects into our readme. So as I mentioned, Shields.io is our starting place for making nice, attractive buttons, some with dynamic content in them. But the first interesting thing you'll see on my GitHub profile is actually powered by a project called GitHub README Stats. And we'll have links to all of these projects in the show notes. And that dynamically generates GitHub stats from your contributions and everything that you do on GitHub. That project is automatically run for you. You create a link with your profile in it, and it automatically generates a new image every day. So that's accurate each day for the number of issues you've raised, closed, commits, pull requests, all of that sort of stuff.
So is that an image that's generated and hosted elsewhere, and that's just embedded in your README file?
somebody else manages the creation of that image, and it's just an image embedded in my README file.
Is that like a dashboard kind of like headline like numbers? Right.
Yes. Yes. So you can just see, activity and all the rest. Now, I found this interesting because I was sort of chasing the GitHub badges, and I was after the 1024 pull requests, and looking at that was keeping me praised as to how close I was. Now, at the heart of all of this stuff is a project called README Scribe. And I think there are probably other projects that do the same thing. This is just the one that I happen to be using. And what README Scribe does is it automatically generates and updates markdown content like your readme.md file. So Alan is a fan of the Hugo static website generator, and README Scribe works a lot like that. It has some additional markup that sits inside a template. So you create your README file as a template, and then there's some additional markup in there that README Scribe interprets in order to automatically embed, let's call it, in air quotes, live data.
You just reminded me that when I first saw this, you suggested it as a way, not on a personal account, but on a corporate account, to make your corporate GitHub presence look a little bit more interesting and not just your company name.
Right.
And I stole what you'd done at a previous employer and put it in our company one, which just shows the most recent 5 blog posts we've published and the most recent 5 topics on Discourse or something like that. Just something a little bit dynamic to make it more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to, a landing page for your, company project or your open source community. It's a great way to signpost like where there's activity and new information to go and find. So on mine, I've got my latest blog post from my blog. I have a section about this podcast, and I have the most recent 5 podcast episodes linked in there. And I have my most recent live streams. I haven't live streamed for 18 months, so that's not been updated anytime soon.
Golly.
And my most recent YouTube videos and things like that. But also things like the most recent projects I've put a GitHub star on, because actually that's quite an interesting thing to share about. These are interesting projects I've recently found. Or the projects that have most recently had a release that I have contributed code to. So you can see a whole bunch of projects, and those are the ones that I've been involved in some way. So it's a really nice way to sort of promote not just yourself, but projects that you like, projects that you've contributed to, and things like that. And I also have a little call out to mention and thank the sponsors on my GitHub profile as well. So, it's a nice little touch. And that uses a GitHub action called Git Auto Commit Action, which is an unusual thing because usually some sort of automation in GitHub would create a pull request that gets reviewed and you have to, click buttons and what have you. This makes the changes. So it takes the README template, composes the new README file, and then automatically commits that directly to the repository to make that live.
I know some people are a little bit twitchy about the idea of automation just having write access to your repository. Is there some control over that you have, or does it just it only has access to that one repository, the one with your README in it?
Yeah, that's it.
Right, okay.
It just has access to the special repository, which is your README file, and the only thing it's updating is the readme.md file. So, the worst that can happen is I deface my own GitHub profile and, have to, go in and manually clean it up. But worse things happen, right?
Or someone hacks that GitHub action and everyone who uses it gets a link to donate to my Bitcoin on all their READMEs.
Yeah, that is possible. So the way you could save yourself from that is you could fork the README Scribe project and use your own fork of README Scribe if you wanted to protect yourself. I haven't done that. I just thought of it. I shall make notes.
By the time you hear this.
Nice.
And the other project I'm using is I also have a GitHub organization called Wimpy's World, and I use another GitHub action called push files to another repository, which does exactly as it describes. So when that README file gets composed, that gets automatically pushed and published to the special README file for my organization. So both of those are the same as one another. And then for a bit of fun, I have embedded another project called Snook, or Snake, SNK. And this is rather fun. This takes your GitHub user contribution graph and then turns that into an animated snake game. So you get that GitHub graph, and then you get a snake going around and gobbling up all of the commit squares by fewest commits by day ever. So it dashes around furiously in a sort of rather random order, eating up all of your commits for the last year. That serves no purpose other than being fun.
And that's actually like, it looks like a live animation on the page. So is there any this is still just a markdown file. There's no JavaScript or anything going on there, is there? How does that animation there happen?
So the README is just a markdown file. There is no JavaScript inside it. That snake animation is actually an SVG that has the animation built inside it.
Huh.
And the Snake SNK project has a GitHub action to regenerate that image. So I regenerate that each night, so it's accurate for up to the previous day. And then I use another project called GH Action GitHub Pages, which builds that image and puts it in a branch in the project. So it's not in the main repository. That snake animation is in a separate branch, and the README file references the image in the branch.
Neat.
That's very clever. I like that. This episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/Linux Matters. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices and infrastructure together. It's the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other, wherever they are. PCs and laptops, servers, cloud instances, 3D printers, network storage. Connect anything and everything you want, wherever it is, and get started in minutes. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, and you get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free with no credit card required. So support the show and go to tailscale.com/Linux Matters and try Tailscale out today. Or if you want to use Tailscale at an industrial scale with more users and devices, or take advantage of features like MDM policies, auditing, network flow logging, and priority support, try it out at work using the code Linux25. You'll get 3 free months of any Tailscale paid plan, and you can find out why thousands of companies like Instacart, Hugging Face, and Duolingo have switched to Tailscale. That's code Linux25. I made a rod for my own back some years ago, and I'm still suffering with it.
Oh dear.
Some years ago, you may recall, I used to work at a company called Canonical. You may have heard of them. And while I was there, one of the things I used to do a lot of is make snaps and help other people make snaps. And for whatever reason, I ended up maintaining a lot of snaps under my account. So there are, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 snaps in my name published in the Snap Store. And they're varying degrees of popularity from like 10 downloads up to, 1,000 or something. And those projects are almost all not my code. They're other projects from other people that I'm ingesting and then publishing in the Snap Store. Now, one of the problems with that is I'm not a member of all of those communities of those, let's say, 50 different projects. And so I don't know all of those projects inside out. And I especially don't keep an eye on all of the releases of all of those projects every day. Perhaps I should. So what I did some time ago is I wrote a shell script, and I've recently rewritten it in Python. And the reason I rewrote it in Python is because I committed to, the reason I rewrote it in Python is because I had a disk crash and I didn't have a backup of that shell script. And so I had to write it again, and I promised not to write it in shell, so I wrote it in Python. And what this does is helps me keep up to date with those snaps. All it does is go through each of the snaps in a list and look at the version number that's published in the Snap Store. And then it looks at the upstream project and looks at the version number in there and does a comparison, and then prints out a report. I say print. I don't have a dot matrix printer with much. I would really like that. It doesn't print it. It creates an HTML page, which I publish. And then I can look at that and see at a glance, which of the snaps are outdated and which ones are up to date. So that's what it's for. And I think the thing that I've discovered over the years it's quite a lot of work to maintain a bunch of snaps. Now, some of them don't get updated ever. Like some of them are games that have been published, never updated. Others are updated once a week or every 2 weeks or on a more regular cadence. There's not many that are updated daily or anywhere near as often as that, but a lot of them do get updated in the Edge channel. So they will build like once a day or something, and there will be a up-to-date build in the Edge channel. But most of them are updated fairly infrequently. So this isn't a massive problem.
So in addition to like the actual upstream software having new revisions, how much of your maintenance churn is keeping up with changes to snaps and the Snapcraft underpinnings itself?
That's the problem.
Ah.
The thing is, because I'm not in all of those communities, and I don't necessarily look at all of them on a regular basis, all it takes is for one of those projects in a point release to bump something like the version of Go that should be used to build it, or Node, or some other dependency, and I have to go grubbing around in the changelog to see what changed so that I can then rev that in the Snapcraft YAML. And that happened recently, and I had to bump the version of Go and the version of Node in a point release of one of the applications that I've snapped. And that was okay because it then built. But then the very next one, they bumped a compiler that's required, and that wasn't available in the repository for the version of Ubuntu I was building on, which was like 2004 or something, or 2204. And so I had to then bump the version of Ubuntu that it was building on. And so there's lots of those little details that you have to go grubbing around. Now, I know where to find that stuff out, but it's time spent doing that stuff because a lot of this stuff is hardwired in the YAML and can't easily be auto-detected at the time when the snap is being built. Now, part of this is a byproduct of the fact that the YAML lives outside the upstream repository, and it's in one of my repositories. If it was inside the repository of the upstream project, then they could dynamically update the YAML when they bump Go or Node or whatever. But there's a reason it's not in the upstream repo for all these projects, and that's because some of them didn't want to, or don't have time for it, or they don't have anyone who knows snaps, or someone who runs Ubuntu. And so there's reasons why they're not there, and they're in my repo. And that's the rod that I've made for my own back, is I have to carry on maintaining these things, or try and offload them to somebody else and get someone else to maintain them.
So this sounds like the typical package maintainer's lament. You know, I
Yes.
contributed a load of packages to an ecosystem, and oh no, now I've got to keep them up to date and maintain them and make sure they keep working. Does this feel any easier to you than like maintaining a bunch of PPAs for projects that you were interested in, for example?
Oh God, it's a order of magnitude easier than maintaining PPAs. Yes, maybe 2 orders of magnitude. But you know what would be even easier is Flatpak, because in Flatpak, each of the repos that contain, let's say, if you look at FlatHub, each of the repositories that contain the Flatpak configuration, which is analogous to the Snapcraft configuration, they're all in one giant mono, I think they call it a mono repo, or repos within one org, the FlatHub org. And so anyone can go along and bump any one of those or report an issue against any one of those. There's like a central location. And this is one of the things I think FlatHub did well, really well, was having a good central location so that anyone could just go in there and maintain one of the Flatpaks with a pull request and just say, oh, look, it's been bumped upstream. And that could even be the upstream developer knowing that it's been updated and just go and nudge one file or have the knowledge to nudge one file and bump a compiler or a tool chain or whatever it might be. And because we don't really have that in the Snapcraft world, each snap is maintained generally by one person or one team. It's actually quite uncommon for one person to maintain 50 snaps. That's a bit unusual. And I think me and a few other people who worked at Canonical are the anomalies here in more ways than one. And so I'm not, oh, woe is me. It's just an interesting challenge to keep up to date. Now, it does mean my knowledge of all these things is increasing over time. So I now know a little bit more about how the Fab Agon emulator piece of software is built in Rust. I don't have any Rust projects of my own. I've now learned a little bit more about the Rust toolchain and how to build things. Similarly, the Forgeo GitForge uses Go and Node and loads of other bits and bobs. And I know a bit more about that as well. So it's all learning stuff, and it's useful information for when I come and look at other things, other pieces of software, and I have a broad understanding about a lot of things. Not necessarily a very deep understanding of them, but broad enough to be dangerous. And I find that interesting and useful.
Now that you've had to do this a few times on specific projects, do you think that there's any scope for you to write some sort of automation where you have your Snapcraft YAML file to watch the project that it's based on and be able to make changes dynamically in response to things they change, now that you know what you're looking for in that project?
Yes and no. Yes, I do have that automation. So I have GitHub Actions in each of the repos that go and look at the upstream repo and see when there's a new release, and they just ninja the version number in the Snapcraft YAML. And that then triggers a new build. But if something changes that breaks the build, then that's the problem.
You don't know where to look or what to look at in each release to tell you what you'd need to change automatically.
Yeah, and what I probably could do with is a dashboard built from the GitHub actions that are running in each of those repos that actually shows me, hey, this thing failed to build, and here's the section of the log file. Here's the bottom 100 lines of the log file. You probably want to look at this. That would probably be a step in the right direction, because what happens now is something fails to build. I then clone the repo on an x86 box running Linux, which is not the laptop I'm sat at necessarily at work. I SSH to another machine and I clone the project that's got the YAML in it, and then I try building it locally, see how it fails. And that's a bit clumsy. And I think, yes, there are ways in which I could optimize this by it telling me where it's failing. Definitely, that would be better.
Another thing that it could do, when you've got time to write this,
Hatch is welcome,
is if it fails, it could do a git bisect to find the commit it was that made it fail, and then you've got all that you have less to wade through to find the change that broke it.
Did you hear that, listeners? That was nerd sniping.
Yeah, it's already going through my head as to a thing that I could do. The other thing that's interesting is some of the projects don't have a Git repo, or the code that I'm ingesting isn't in a Git repo. I'm pulling in a tarball from a website and just like building that, jamming that into a snap. And so there are some like snowflakes that are a little bit different than all the others. But for the most part, yeah, the vast majority of them, it's exactly as you say. I could do a bisect and figure out what's the difference between the one that built and the one that didn't build. And actually, I could probably automate most of that.
So you've talked about more automation and how to improve like the process, but have you thought about how you're going to unburden yourself from maintaining all of these things? I imagine some of which you don't use like on the regular yourself. Yeah,
I've tried this a couple of times. I've posted to the Snapcraft forum in the past. When I left Canonical, I posted a thing and said, hey, here's a big list of snaps. Anyone want to take these on? And I didn't get a lot of volunteers, actually, because what really should happen is I should hand them to upstreams. But it turns out some of those upstreams just don't want them. They don't care because they've got their own packaging to worry about. They've got their own ways of distributing these things, and they really don't care. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, and it's possible that, at some point I will stop packaging them or put a little signpost that says, hey, you know what? You should go over here and install the Flatpak instead. Or, here's the GitHub repo. Go and grab the deb file or something like that. But I'm not quite there yet. I've still got some more fun things to do now that Mark's nerd sniped me with some automation suggestions. I'll probably do that and automate as much as I possibly can, because that's all, like you said, Martin, it's like learning about the whole automation process. And I'll probably write a bit of Python, maybe create a dashboard. Yeah, that kind of stuff I find interesting. And so, yeah, I'll probably do that first before I offload them to somebody else.
Linux Matters is part of the Late Night Linux family. If you enjoy this show, then please consider supporting us and the rest of the Late Night Linux team using the PayPal or Patreon links you can find at linuxmatters.sh/support. For $5 a month on Patreon, you can enjoy an ad-free feed of our show. Or, for $10, get access to all the Late Night Linux shows ad-free. We love to get your feedback via email, show@linuxmatters.sh, or you can chat with us and other listeners in our Telegram group. All the details are available at linuxmatters.sh/contact.
This week I retired. An open source project.
Oh, got my hopes up then.
I was going to ask, how do you do that retirement thing so young? Please give me tips. I will subscribe to your newsletter.
So in an earlier episode, I believe it was all the way back in episode 5 of this podcast,
Crikey.
I discussed writing a GNOME extension.
Was this the audio one?
Yes, it was called, well, I called it Advanced Volume Control, imaginatively. It was basically a little widget that gave you a volume slider for each of your audio outputs on your system. So if you sometimes used one but sometimes used another and you wanted to, for example, headphones or speakers, it let you control the volume of each of them from the desktop. And it worked quite well, and it was fairly successful by my standards. It got about 7,500 downloads on extensions.gnome.org, which I don't know how that compares to others, but I was quite happy to see that. However, not long ago, I upgraded to Ubuntu 24.04, which has GNOME 46, and I discovered that GNOME liked my extension so much that they built this functionality directly into the desktop.
That is the best reason ever to retire a bit of software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's validation, isn't it? That, like, other people, well, obviously the number of downloads you had was indicative of people want control over their volume, but then the OS to actually deliver it is quite good, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the same feature. You don't get multiple volume control sliders in the desktop, but what you can do now is if you expand the little settings widget at the top, you can now select from your available audio interfaces, and then the slider controls the one you've got selected, which means you can switch between them and control the volume quite easily. So for my purposes, it made the thing I'd built completely obsolete.
What about if someone else wanted to carry on maintaining it? How would that work? Would they just fork it and call it something else, like, you know, really ultra advanced audio mixer or something?
Pro Gold Plus.
Yeah, plus.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, yes, they're welcome to. So in terms of what I actually did to retire this, I hadn't updated it for the previous couple of versions of GNOME. So I wanted to make it clear to anyone looking at the extension that this wasn't something that was being actively developed. So I went onto the page on the GNOME extension's website and I just put a note there saying, this is no longer maintained because the functionality is there in the latest version of GNOME Shell. Then I went to GitHub and I basically put the same thing in the README, and then I closed all of the open issues, the 2 or 3 open issues and pull requests, and marked the repository as archived. So it is all still there. The code is available if anyone does want to fork it or they rely on it for something which isn't in my use case and they want to keep it going. But for my purposes, it's, I think, clear that nothing else is going to happen to it at this point.
How does it work if you've been maintaining it under, I guess it was under your GitHub account and not an org or anything?
Yep.
If someone wanted to continue maintaining it with the 7,000 users and the visibility it has and the inbound links from our podcast from ages ago, I'm sure that all helps, and the conversation underneath, if someone wanted to continue maintaining it, then they would have to fork it, right? They can't take it from you, or how would that work?
That's a good question. I mean, you're a maintainer on the GitHub repository, so I don't know if you would be able to, I can't remember how the release process on extensions.gnome.org works. So whether it actually does it directly from GitHub, I can't remember whether it's like you upload a zip file and anyone could do that, or I could give someone else permission to that page.
As I remember it, GitHub archived projects can't be unarchived. That is now, they're frozen. That's it. You can't unarchive an archived project.
Right.
Are you sure? I'm pretty sure I've done that. I've done that recently.
Have you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've unarchived something.
Okay. But I don't think you'd be able to publish into the same namespace that Mark's using, though.
Yeah, because the namespace has got your GitHub account in it. Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yes.
It's not my GitHub account. It's my Gnome Extensions account.
Right. Okay.
By the looks of it.
So yes, someone would need to fork it, but then you could update the web page and say this is replaced by, and then signpost the place to go.
Yes, and I'd be more than happy to do that if anyone did listen to this and thought that they wanted to carry it on. They are more than welcome to.
Excellent. Do you feel lighter and less burdened by this software that's nagging in the background with the 2 issues?
I do slightly. It always makes me feel a bit bad when I've put something out there to the world and I sort of just lose the motivation or the interest to work on it that I once had, and sort of leaves me wondering what people might be using it for out there in the world. But now I've done the responsible thing and made it clear where I stand on it. So there's not people there holding out false hope that I'm going to fix the bug that they reported or whatever.
It's funny because I was discussing this about a year ago with someone at work about how when you open source something, when you actively decide to make something open source and you put it in a repo somewhere and you make it publicly accessible, do you then have responsibility to do something with that and continue maintaining it? And their argument was, no, I put it open source so that you could look at it, you can use it, you can remix it, you can change it as much as you like. It doesn't put any responsibility on me to continue maintaining it or to answer your issues or support requests or merge your pull requests. There's no obligation for me to do that. It feels like that in GitHub, but there's no obligation to do that. And you should just feel free to just, I don't know, put a tarball somewhere and say, there you go, have at it.
I think that is the schism between the developer of software and the opinion of somebody that puts some open source software in a repository somewhere and the users of that software, where they think you are now going to continue to service and maintain that software in line with their expectations and desires.
You are part of my software supply chain.
Right, exactly.
Well done.
Little do they know that I wrote that in my pants in my bedroom one evening, and that's as much attention as it's ever going to receive.
That applies for every piece of software I've ever written. In my pants, in your bedroom.